Hey everyone, and welcome. So, when your doctor orders a blood test, you probably imagine something pretty simple, right? A little vial of blood goes into some fancy machine and a result pops out. But what if I told you it's not a single event, but a whole relay race for your health? Today, we're going to follow that hidden journey and see what happens when someone, somewhere, drops the baton. And just to get a sense of how high the stakes are, get a load of this number. Over 60% of the really big medical decisions, we're talking diagnoses, treatments, the whole shebang, they all depend on these lab results. It's not an exaggeration to say they are the absolute backbone of modern medicine. So that leads to a pretty scary question. If we lean on these tests so heavily, what happens when that system fails? When the result is late or just plain wrong, or maybe it never even shows up at all. To figure that out, we're diving into this really fascinating study from 2016 at the University of Gondar Hospital in Ethiopia. See, researchers there wanted to know what was going on after the hospital's lab rating just plummeted from a solid 3 stars all the way down to 1. And what they found really pulls back the curtain on just how fragile this whole process can be. So what the researchers did was look at something called the total testing process. It's a great way to think about it, not as one single action, but as a journey with 3 distinct parts. We're going to follow a blood sample through every single one of these stages to see exactly where things go off the rails. All right, so here they are, the 3 legs of the race. First up, you've got the pre-analytical phase. That's everything that happens before the sample even gets tested. Then the analytical phase. That's the actual science part. And finally, the post-analytical phase, which is all about getting those results back to the doctor who needs them. Let's start right at the beginning with that first leg, the pre-analytical phase. This covers everything from the doctor ordering the test to the sample landing on the lab bench. And as it turns out, this is where the race often goes sideways before it's even really started. Okay, now just look at this chart. This is kind of mind-blowing. When the researchers added up all the errors, a whopping 89.6%, we're talking nearly 9 out of every 10 mistakes, happened in that first phase. Meanwhile, the actual science bit, the analytical phase, just a tiny sliver. That tells you something huge. The high-tech part is working great. It's the human logistical steps where things are falling apart. So what was the biggest single source of those errors? Paperwork. I'm not kidding. Of the more than 3,000 request forms they looked at, almost every single one, 99.9%, was missing some piece of crucial information. It sounds like a tiny clerical problem, but the downstream effects are just massive. And here's what was missing. 99% of forms had no clinical data that tells the lab why they're running the test and helps them spot weird results. Over 99% were missing the time of collection, which is critical because some things in your blood change by the hour. And get this, almost 40% didn't even have the doctor's name on them. How are you supposed to report back a result? But it wasn't just the forms. The blood samples themselves were often the problem. The study found that nearly 4% of all the samples that showed up at the lab were basically dead on arrival. They had to be tossed in the trash before a single test could even be run on them. And this chart shows you exactly why. The top reason was something called hemolysis. That's just a fancy word for the red blood cells getting damaged, usually during the blood draw, which messes up the whole sample. The next 2 are pure logistical chaos. A sample shows up with no form, or a form shows up with no sample. And right behind that, mislabeled samples. Every single one of these means a patient has to get stuck with the needle all over again. Okay, on to the second leg of our relay, the analytical phase. This is the part we all picture, right? The lab codes, the worrying machines. It's supposed to be the most precise, most controlled part of the whole journey. But, you guessed it, even here, there were some serious issues. So, to make sure those fancy machines are actually accurate, labs have to do something called quality control, or QC. You can think of it as the lab giving itself a pop quiz. They run their own internal checks every day, and then, every so often, an outside agency sends them a sample with a secret known value to see if their machines can get the right answer. So, how did this lab do on its own quizzes? Well, their daily internal checks failed about 14% of the time. Not great. But look at the external checks, the big final exam from the outside agency. They failed more than half the time, a 51.4% failure rate. That's basically a coin flip, and it points to a major systemic problem with how their equipment is calibrated. All right, we've made it to the final stretch, the post-analytical phase. The test is done, the machine has a result, but the race is absolutely not over. That little piece of data now has to complete its journey back to the doctor and the patient, and it needs to get there fast. The first obstacle in this final mile is just the clock. The study found that almost 9% of the results weren't delivered on time. Now, for a patient anxiously waiting for a diagnosis or a doctor trying to make a treatment plan, these delays really matter. They can mean longer hospital stays and postponed care. Delays are bad for sure, but there's a whole other category of results that are way more urgent. Labs have a list of what they call critical values. These are results that are so far off the charts, they signal a life-threatening emergency that needs immediate, right-now attention. Getting word of these out is, without a doubt, the most important job in this entire final phase. So over the course of the study, the lab's machines flagged 15 of these critical values. That's 15 separate times where a patient's results were basically screaming emergency, signaling a direct and immediate threat to their life. And here it is. This is the single most shocking finding in the whole study. Of those 15 life or death alerts, exactly 0 made it back to a doctor. Not one. A 100% failure rate when it mattered most. Remember all those forms with no doctor's name on them? Well, this is where that simple paperwork mistake turns into a potential tragedy. So when you step back and look at the whole picture, you can see how it all connects. It's a domino effect. A simple clerical error on a form at the very beginning of the race cascades through the whole system and leads to a total communication collapse at the finish line. It's just a powerful reminder that even the most amazing science is only as good as the human systems that support it. And the researchers themselves said it best. They concluded that this high frequency of errors was basically a giant red flag, signaling that the hospital had to fix problems in every single part of the process. You can't just fix one thing. The entire system needs an overhaul. And that really just leaves us with one last thought to chew on. This one study from one hospital gives us a rare peek into a process that for most of us is completely invisible. It's a powerful reminder that our health relies on these incredibly complex systems, run by other human beings. And it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Just how strong are the links in that chain that we all depend on every single day?